Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Son of the Morning Comics channel, where we're gonna continue our review of Harleen. So, before we get started on that, I just want to kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell. If you'd like to chat with me, you can hit me up at sonofthemorning7 over on Twitter, and feel free to leave some comments down below. So, we left off at the end of Chapter 1 on the last video, or not Chapter 1, I should say Book 1, and so today we'll do Book number 2. So at the start of Book 2, it begins here with the Joker sort of tormenting Harleen a little bit, and he's basically talking about how, how it feels to put your hands around somebody's neck, especially if it's an enemy, and she notes that she doesn't have any enemies, but, he's just being the Joker, of course. What the Joker was basically saying was that everybody in Gotham City has that capability of evil. It's just a matter of if they're pushed to it or not, that sort of thing. Harleen's response is, Gotham is full of people like that, hands twitching while they dream of violence, shivering with barely suppressed rage, brimming with righteous indignation. So she's starting to sort of understand him a little bit. And so the Joker interjects and he says, they're smiling as they imagine doing savage acts. Every last one of them, a bomb that needs but a single spark to set it off. And then, well, that's when things get fun. And so you can just sort of see here, this is perhaps a shot into the future. We don't really know. It could be a dream. I think that it's basically showing into the future. Absolutely wonderful art as usual here. Stepan Sejic has done just a wonderful job with both the writing and the art. And it's not just, look at the detail even in the background of the pictures, like the archways of the room that they're in. Just amazing stuff. So, he's talking about the fun part starting, and then, he's about to get caught here, it would appear, before he takes a bonk on the head. And this being why I think this is sort of looking into the future, obviously, because we see Harley Quinn, is the one bashing the cop's head in, and of course yelling, "Don't touch my puddin'." She comments, later in life, dark times, my mind would go back. Later in life, in dark times, my mind would go back to this conversation. And so, she's starting to have some interesting thoughts about good old Jay, or Mr. J. But it's all kind of making her angry. She's not liking the, the way that he's talking to her. He makes some comments like, what does he say here? He says, people are all monsters in hiding until the rubber band of their mask breaks, that sort of thing. And then she sort of asks him, is that what you dream of? And he sort of tells her, no, my dreams are actually quite simple and normal. She's very annoyed with him at this point in time. She states in her monologue, I dwell on the small details of what he'd said, wondering if they carried any larger meanings, but not that day. That day I was pissed. I felt like some sad retelling of the Stanford prison experiment wrapped in anecdotal nonsense, the sort of garbage he'd fed his previous therapists. It was downright offensive. So you can see that she's kind of annoyed there by good old Mr. J. So she heads back to her apartment and does what we've seen her do already several times in the first book, is she starts to drink herself into a stupor, and then she starts thinking about, just the supervillains who she has already interviewed. And then she's just sitting drinking, and the phone rings, and it is the doctor from the institute that suggested that she get this research grant and all of that good stuff. And she's telling her, like, okay, did you hear what happened to Harvey Dent? Do you know what's going on? And she tells her, no, I don't know what's going on. She says, just turn on the TV to any channel. So in this, if she's watching TV, you see Harvey Dent. He's right here. So, he's here giving his press conference. Unfortunately, there's a not-so-righteous figure standing in the background, and that is Salvatore Maroni. He's a mob boss, and he has got something planned for Mr. Dent. I think if you're any sort of Batman fan, you know where this is going, as he throws acid on his face, burning the entire left side of his face and his left arm. As Harleen comments, she says, and as I watched it happening, a sickening thought tormented me. I wanted to hurt him myself just that very morning, as she did have the meeting with him where he wasn't too nice from her. So she continues watching TV when she's something else happens. You see these guys here. These are cops who have decided they've had enough of this stuff happening in their city, and they're taking things into their own hands. And so they have him here. He's been caught now. Obviously, you can't throw acid on somebody's face and in front of that many people and that many officers and not get caught. They basically execute him, and they send the tape to the evening news. So obviously the cops are starting to take things into their own hands here. They've had enough of the dirt in Gotham. But that doesn't even end well for these cops as well. As you can see, just an absolutely gorgeous shot here of Batman and Robin dropping in on these cops here that are, playing vigilante themselves. What a fantastic illustration that is there. Here at the top panel here, the reporter's talking about how 68% of the people in Gotham City supported the vigilante work of these cops, but, Commissioner Gordon's not too happy about it. They're asking him, what's the difference between these people and Batman, because he is not okay with this. And he basically says, well, Batman's not a murderer, and walks off from there. And so here we see Harleen sitting in the same place where Batman beat the hell out of the Joker when he was arrested. And she's saying, I feel an unsettling shudder run through my body and remember the sound of cheers. It all feels so familiar, so sinister, and I remember his words. Gotham is full of people like that, hands twitching as they dream of violence, shivering with barely suppressed rage, brimming with righteous indignation, smiling politely as they dream of savage things. That night, after the sobering news takes the edge off my nightcap, I too dream of savage things. So you can see she's starting to sort of, I don't want to say turn, but she's definitely becoming more confused about her own situation. But she is comforting herself. I guess comforting is the wrong word. Where because of the way that these executioners had gone about their business, she's sort of looking at it as like this is the sort of perfect situation for her to do her research. It's all about a lack of empathy. This is kind of a perfect situation that she thinks that she could use. So she goes to see Commissioner Gordon, and, she does have an appointment. He forgets about it, but that's all right. So he's gonna see her, and so then when they're talking here a little bit, he takes her up to see one of these guys who was one of the executioners. And it's a really interesting sort of thing here. He's just sort of sitting there, and he says, he's asked, how did this happen? Where's the other person? The tape was dropped off to the newspaper anonymously. There has to be someone else. And he says, I don't know, maybe it was the bat. Yeah, must have been him. Maybe he was trying to say he's gonna fight to protect the murderous filth like Maroney. Or not, maybe there's more of us ready to do what needs to be done. So you can see that there's a growing problem in Gotham City, and clearly this guy is not alone in his beliefs. And so after that little experience, she asked Commissioner Gordon if there is any way that she would be able to, meet Batman, is because she knows that he has the way to contact him. And he says, sure, he can do that, but it's going to take some time. So she's got to wait. She has to sit around and wait. And she says she waited for hours. And she never had any feeling of being uneasy. But for the first time sitting in a police station, she does feel uneasy. So finally, Commissioner Gordon comes to get her. And, he scares her a little bit, but that's okay. Takes her up onto the roof where she gets to meet Batman. And so she's up there, and she says she wants to know, like, how did you do what you do? And then, Commissioner Gordon interjects, the good doctor here wanted to ask you something. Go on. Do you think that they can be helped? That's what she wants to ask Batman. That was the major reason why she wants to meet Batman. Her whole thing is about empathy. She wants to know if these people that he's encountered many times can be fixed. And I'm not sure he's going to have the easiest or the nicest response to that. She questions if that's why he lets them live, because, that he feels that they can be rehabilitated. And his response is just that, I don't kill. Which, we all know that about Batman. Batman doesn't kill, or at least he shouldn't. And then she says, yes, but I need to know why. I need a reason. And then his response is, I don't kill because as hard as it is sometimes, it's still the right choice. I don't kill because I don't want to give up on them or on myself. So she kind of has her answer. So she says, okay, yeah, you do believe in hope for them. I love this shot here with them in the foreground, but also in the background in front of the bat signal there. Very cool stuff. Batman has to take his leave, and Harleen comments as their conversation drowned in the sounds of the city. I considered all I had seen and heard that night and felt an irresistible desire to return to Arkham. Because, in all honesty, at that moment, it seemed like a more sane place to be. So Harleen waits about 3 days before she goes to see the Joker again. You know, she thinks that it wasn't likely that he'd tell her about the moment that he shed his own mask and howled at the moon with all the other monsters, but she's gonna try. And, you know, she knows that she's gonna have to take her time and do what she does best, which is listen. And then he says to her, Dr. Quinn. And so then he says, is it okay if I call you Dr. Quinn? And she said, yeah, I've heard worse. And then they get into a very interesting conversation here. She is asking him about what his thoughts about, like, you know, the law are. And basically his response is, see, in the age of the metahumans, the notion of people imposing law and order is downright hilarious. And then you have the Batman. She wants to know what he has anything to do with this situation, and he responds, well, think about it. Deep down, all the Gotham cops know they're fighting a losing battle. Some of my roommates here in Arkham pack so much power they could take on an army on their own. So he's seeing, you know, so the cops compromise, they mount a cry for help to the top of the police headquarters, then they send out a signal for the Avatar of Justice, a man who does what he wants and, you know, doesn't ever have any repercussions for it. Harleen replies, the police have never officially condoned, and then the Joker interrupts her, vigilantes. Yes, I know, Doctor. Very interesting conversation going on here between the two of them. The Joker starts talking again about, you know, the makeup of the city, how it's a city of monsters, and it's only a matter of time before Batman ends up killing one of them, and then, you know, you'll see the true face of Gotham's police department at that point, and, you know, he says, see, they will condemn him in public, but at the same time, you will see a dramatic increase in the use of deadly force from the police. And then the beasts of Gotham come out, add it to what we already got there, and then you got slaughter happening in the streets. And, you know, his last remark is, you've seen this, haven't you? The Joker notes that he says, well, I guess that makes me a little bit crazy then, doesn't it? And she wants to ask more questions. He says, you know, he's done. And he had already said that, I'm done for the day. And she just wants to know why he didn't pull the trigger that day when he could have killed her. And basically he says that, you know, there's two different you know, faces that are that get to him above anything else. It's abject horror and an honest smile. And he says, but that night when I stared at you, flame-lit face of terror, I thought I wouldn't mind seeing her smile. And then she gets a little bit angry at this, but then he, looking very sincerely, looks at her and he says, no joke. I'd love to see you smile one day. And her last little monologue on this part was, it was his tone of voice, the way he said it, at his breath's very end, as if taking a new breath would give him the time to reconsider. It felt like he meant it. Such good writing in this book. I'm such a fan of the writing in here. And so that night, Harleen goes home. She just doesn't even feel like she needs to do her usual bedtime activities, falls asleep, ends up in another dream. This time, the dream is of the Joker being executed. And once again, she's seeing the people gathering around to cheer it on, except this time they're looking like monsters. Kind of getting back to what the Joker was saying about the people of Gotham City. And then, right before he's about to be executed, he says, a smile. And then you see she says, I only slept for 3 hours that night. Here we can see that even in prison, the Joker still has means of getting things done. One of the correctional officers brings him a file, and, he's happy to have it. The guy wants more money, but he says no. So then, we have Harleen. She's realizes it's time that she sat up all night, and it's time to get ready for work, and she goes into the washroom where she starts getting ready, and, she looks at herself in the mirror, starts pulling her hair back and smiling, and, she's starting to think about, well, that's the reason why he didn't shoot me, is because I was too beautiful to die. And then as soon as she started thinking, realized what she thought of, she immediately regrets that. And then she says to herself again, little did I know, it was far from over. He had stolen my nights, my days, and my smile. Next would be my heart. In response to her feeling this way, she spends the next few weeks avoiding the Joker. You can see she's here. She's going through the rogues gallery of baddies for Batman, and then I like the interview with Poison Ivy. I thought it was really interesting because, at first she's not even paying attention, and Poison Ivy's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, sorry." And she's like, "Is it me?" And then, Poison Ivy is being interviewed here still. And Ivy notices that Harleen's hormones levels are up. And she's like, huh? And basically, you're blushing. And every time you smile, you blush. And that, Poison Ivy says, usually I have to kiss a person to elicit such a response, so I'm wondering whether my abilities have evolved. And then she's like, okay, that's enough for today. See you later, Miss Isley. And it's Ivy. And of course, she's not pleased with herself for how she acted in that interview, but then she starts thinking about the Joker situation again, and how she can't seem to get it out of his head. How sincere, how painfully sincere he sounded in that moment when he told her that he wanted to see her smile. One of the guards asks if she's okay. She gives the old thumbs up and that she's gonna be fine. And he says to her, had a rough day? Come on, I got something that might make it a bit easier. Her response is booze. And he says, I thought you quit. And she says, feels like a good time for a relapse. So after that little brief conversation, they go their separate ways, and she goes to see the Joker again. Now, this time, she isn't filing any paperwork. She's not letting anyone know that she's doing it. She's just doing it. Because, these visits aren't for the patient's sake after all. They're for her, which is starting to become problematic. As she's sitting there and she's just watching him sleep, and she says that he looks almost beautiful, and that, as she's watching him sleep, he doesn't look scary, he just looks scarred. And then you can see he turns around and his back is all scarred up. Here we have Harvey Dent being treated in the hospital after having acid poured on his face, and that he's not too pleased about the whole situation, as you might imagine. He wants to have a press conference as soon as possible. He wants to get on top of this thing, starts to take off the bandages, starts to see what's actually going on that side of his face there. And he's not too impressed, and why should he be? And everybody wants him to call it off, but he's saying, no, I have to continue. His assistant is saying, okay, we'll do whatever we gotta do. And then you can see some of that crazy popping out. He says, make them afraid, Harvey is thinking in his mind, and he says, what? And so you can see he's starting to go a little bit crazy there. And not quite as crazy as he'll end up. Here in these top two panels, this is just kind of a representation of how stressed she's becoming, how she's having all these sleepless nights. And then, she starts watching TV again. And just like the last time Harvey Dent was on TV, she's going to see something a little bit out of the ordinary. People are expecting him to be, his regular self. Unfortunately, he's not. He begins to tear the bandages off of his face, saying, I read your newspapers. Most of you bent over backwards to portray Maroney as some misguided soul, a grieving father. Maroney was a cold-blooded killer. We treat these monsters with decency, and this is where it gets us. And so then here, as he continues, but I'll just point out, absolutely wonderful illustration of Two-Face here, and he just continues basically that the city is a cancer, and they need to start doing more to put Gotham City back in a good place. To Harleen, it seems like Two-Face there, Harvey Dent, is just jumping right out of the TV at her. She realizes that, she's just tired of Arkham. She's just tired in general. She's tired of the Joker. And then she, unfortunately, starts thinking about those same things again. About, she asks him, what does he dream about? And he says, oh, simple stuff. Honest smiles. So you can tell he's wanting to see her smile, and this is of course causing her some problems, but she continues on there, and she says, well, I guess that makes me feel a little less crazy then. I think that will be all for today, in response to her saying, in every one of those instances his voice, never mind what I said. She asked him what he dreamt. He said that and then that. In her mind, she's thinking every one of those instances his voice would lose its edge, that raspy tone replaced by something softer, something almost melancholic, anytime he's talking about smiles. So she is seeing that there's good in him, and she feels as though, I think she feels as though she's kind of bringing it out in him. Not necessarily the best plan, but hey, what can you do? So through all of this, what she's kind of realized is that there is more to him. He can potentially be helped, or so she thinks anyway, and that he wasn't being honest with all of those other psychiatrists. He tricked them all, and she wonders if that was what Dr. Hugo Strange thought when he was referring to her crackpot ideas and stuff like that. And she all of a sudden gets frustrated because she realized that in all of those tapes And in all of the interviews, not one person asked him one very valuable question. So she's gonna go do that, and that's so she goes to see him here, and she says, for the first time in a long time, I thought of Professor Collins. That's the one that she had the affair with in college, and not for the usual reasons. No, I wasn't going to give up, not yet. I would be strong. I would ignore the unsettling desire to smile back at him. He's sitting there, he says, Doc, you okay there? So she sits down with him and says, there's only one question that I want to ask you. Keep in mind, this time, he's not in his cell, or he is in his cell, but she's in there with him. He's in a straitjacket, chained to the chair and table and whatnot. She lets him know that she only has one question, and that question is, do you ever feel remorse for the lives you've taken? And his response is, really? Come on, Doc, you've read my files. A narcissistic sociopath, a heartless psychopath, a classic case of an antisocial something or another. And so, she doesn't really like that answer. She says, me personally, I'd rather hear it directly from you. She knows that the predecessors have assumed these things. She wants to know for sure. So he responds to her that for the first ones, there was still that. I guess that the first victim of the streets of Gotham's is one of empathy. And she says, what? And then she comments, her monologue, I remember entering the room that day feeling on top of the world. No glass, no nothing. I was ready for a face-to-face. I had little icebreaker question. It was a planned move, show him something he wasn't used to, catch him off guard, but instead he answered, his answers did the same to me. Any pretense of my emotional detachment was in pieces, and I couldn't believe my ears. And so basically he's saying, regret, empathy, guilt, sympathy, they cause you to hesitate. And that when you're on the streets, you need to be ready all the time with no hesitation. So after those first ones that, where the empathy was still there, he learned to push it down even further. And she realizes here she has to play carefully this situation. And he says, kill all the attachments. She says, I had to play it smart. But is she going to play it smart? We don't know. Because unfortunately, Harleen has taken the bait that he has, cast for her. He says, how does one go about killing their attachments to get that one bad moment when the burden of them becomes too much? When you lose it all. And she asks him, is that happening to you? And his response is, does it matter anymore? She says, it does to me. And his response is, okay, how about you answer one of my questions first? And she says, fine. Big mistake. Big mistake. So his question is, how often do you watch me sleep? So he knows that she's been watching, and that's not good for her. Love the art here. I love the way that the roles are reversed, how she's chained to the chair, how he's sitting with the lab coat on. Very, very cool stuff. And she says how she doesn't even know how to describe it. It's as if I journeyed into his head. I left a trail behind, and he followed. A trail that he followed. I was looking for the big bad wolf, and now there he was, huffing and puffing at the door of my mind. And God help me, a small fucked up part of me wanted to let him in. Effed up part, sorry. It was insane. I had spoken to him only 4 times. The first time he held me at gunpoint, he gave me nightmares, months of nightmares. And now he wants me to smile. And That was it. He needed me. This scarred, broken man needed me. And I wanted to be there for him. I wanted to smile for him. I needed to. Harleen, what are you doing? This is not the right path to be going down. So we'll see what transpires here next. So basically they have a little bit more of a conversation. She's, starting to lose the conversation. Things are not going so well for her. She looks up to see that the camera's not connected to anything there. Makes the comment, he said it in our very first meeting, normal people dream of going crazy. Problem is, sometimes there's no one coming back. And here is the beginning of the turn into Harley Quinn. As you can see, she's starting to loosen up the constraints on him. He's at first wondering what's going on here. You can see he's rather pleased with himself. And she says to herself, and you know what? This is certainly qualified as crazy. It was an adrenaline-fueled move of desperation, and in that moment I allowed the thought I had been running away to finally take shape. A terrifying and darkly alluring image that plagued my mind. So she lets him out of the all of the straitjacket, helps him out, and he's now free to basically do to her what he will. She's, he lets her know that he knows that she cares, and that she says, caring so much that it scares me. You scare me, and yet, she says, you know the one, he loves me. He loves me not. And then he just says, thank you, Dr. Quinn. At which point he gives her a big hug, and he says, Harley. She says, Harley, you can call me Harley. Harley Quinn. I like that. And then the book ends, or at least the second book ends with her saying, I had a dream that night. A dream of a long, winding road, of bats and of a giant beast. I dreamed of a broken man, and in the dream, I smiled. So, that is the end of book number 2 of Harleen. It just keeps getting better as we go along here. Like I said, the art in this book is absolutely fantastic, even on that front cover page there. Loving it. Stepan Sejic has done such a wonderful job with this book. No wonder it became so popular. And hey, I'm sure you want to see what happens in the conclusion. So if you enjoyed this, like I said earlier in the video, do all those liking, subscribing, bell thingy things. They all help. Thank you once again for joining me here on the Son of the Morning Comics channel. We'll do book 3 in the next couple days. So until the next video, have yourself a wonderful morning, noon, evening, or night.